On today's show, I'm talking about the Rangers farm system, where it ranks in years compared to years past, and the top 10 players in the Texas Rangers system, from big leaguers all the way down to the minors, 25 years old and younger. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers, the first and best daily Rangers podcast. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Before we get into an analysis of where this Rangers farm system stacks up to compare to years past, and the top 10 Texas Rangers players from 25 years old and younger. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, last week I did 6 whole shows for you, one of them talking about the big league club, but most of last week talking about the state of the Rangers farm system, unveiling my top 30 prospect rankings. If you haven't listened to those shows, go check them out. Lots of information in depth talking about all of these different prospects. But I want to start with kind of a general overview of what the heck that means. I mean, there's a lot of very in-depth information about all the different prospects, but I kind of want to take a little zoomed out, bigger picture look at the state of this farm system. I mean, there's a lot of decent prospects on there, a lot of guys jumping on there. 8 changes from the midseason of 2024 to preseason 2025. Guys who were added on there include Malcolm Moore, Yolfran Castillo, Dylan Dreiling, Yermy Cabrera, Casey Cook, Mark Church, Skylar Hales, and Brian Magdaleno. Now, half of those guys are in the bottom 10 or so. Just not a whole lot of inspiring ads. The guys who came off, a lot of them were mainly due to trades, at least at the top end. Chedri Vargas definitely would have been a top 10 guy, probably, I think, number 8, but he was the headliner in the trade for Jake Berger. Again, if you're trading a guy who is a top 10 prospect with maybe only one other guy who was on the top 30 in that trade for a guy with 4 years of club control, that's a valuable big leaguer and is shown to be a valuable big leaguer in his career. I think that's a great value trade for the Rangers, especially since it freed up some money for them to go sign Jock Peterson, which helps their big league club. And, you know, as much as I really, really liked Chedri Vargas, it wasn't a huge price to pay for a guy in Jake Berger, who I think can be a really, really solid value add for the Rangers. Now, the biggest riser is, I was going to say is Yolfran Castillo, but I think it has to be Malcolm Moore. Moore I didn't rank in that midseason prospect ranking because he had been in the system for all of 5 minutes, and it's hard to rank those guys immediately after being drafted because you got to see at least a little bit of what they can actually bring to the team. But if I'd put him on that ranking, then he probably would have been somewhere in the top 10, probably not far off from where he ended up as the Rangers' number 6 prospect. But outside of him, Yolfran Castillo, a massive, massive riser, was not even on my radar at all heading into the season, but had a great debut season and jumped all the way into the top 10 Rangers prospects. The biggest fall off, well, there's a couple of guys that had, pretty significant fall off. Foscue was number 2 prospect in my system at midseason. I don't know what I was thinking. I was a little too aggressive there with Foscue, even after some struggles early on. Still, he's not, way, way down there in the system, but again, defensively, it's hard to find a position for him. And he has already been to the big leagues, but it was just a really rough go of it. Gutierrez really fell off quite a bit. Anthony Gutierrez, 17 down. Brock Porter, down 17 from midseason. He could have fallen off a little bit harder at midseason, but I was still holding out some hope. And then the end of the year came, and we still had an awful year. There's still plenty of reason for optimism to expect that he might bounce back. But again, it was just such an incredibly rough year for Brock Porter that it's hard to see that. And Josh Stephen was one of the guys who fell off, massively in this prospect rankings. It was more about me being high on other guys than me just completely falling off on Stephen. He made it to AA and just wasn't all that impressive there. The Rangers left him unprotected on their 40-man roster, so he could have been a Rule 5 draft pick, but no other team picked him because they thought, I don't know if he's really going to be able to stick on a big league roster for the whole year. And I kind of tend to agree with that assessment. Maybe he still he's still got the ceiling of a number 4 starter, and that's really solid for an undrafted free agent, but it was just such a fall off. And then there was a grouping of these guys who they've been thought of as high ceiling guys for a while, but they just haven't done all that much yet in their professional careers to keep warranting that ceiling. They were very ballyhooed international signings. This grouping of Yason Morabel, Glider Figueiredo as well. Those two guys were guys who I've had in my top 30 for quite some time. I mean, they were decently high up there last year. I think they both made it into the top 20. Yeah, Glider Figueiredo at 19 of my midseason prospect rankings last year, and it's time. It was time. These guys haven't shown all that much. I'm still believers in them long term. I think there's still something to be gained there, but it's hard to just keep putting them up there when there's not all that much that's backing them up besides the promise of what they might be when they signed. Eventually you got to kind of level that out. Pablo Guerrero just kind of snuck on there at midseason and was having a really, really nice season. Also a little bit of name recognition of having a father who's a big leaguer, a brother who's a big leaguer, and a really, really talented one. But the second half, immediately after I put him on there, he started putting up not quite as great numbers, but overall the state of this system, it's not quite as deep as it was last year. At the start of the year, you didn't have that top end talent. You had graduations in the system of two guys like Wyatt Langford and Evan Carter, who were top 5 prospects in all of baseball pretty universally, and that's going to hurt your system quite a bit. There were some trades that hurt the depth a little bit. Not too many guys that were in the top 10. I mean, Vargas is the best prospect they gave up in the last year worth of trades, but there were some guys who I really liked on there. Guys, like Brian Mendoza, who was in that Jake Berger trade. Guys like Jose Corniel, who was in a trade. No, not Jose Corniel. Excuse me. Guys like Joseph Montalvo, who was at a midseason trade to the Tigers. I believe that was the trade for Carson Kelly. So I mean, there's just a few guys here and there that you start to add them up. You start to see why the Rangers are in the bottom half of farm system rankings. But then you have those huge jump ups of even from midseason, guys continuing progress. Guys like Rocker, who had a great couple of weeks leading up to the midseason. If you had done it, if I had had to do my midseason prospect rankings before Rocker made it to AA, he probably still would have been somewhere in the 7 to 10 range. But thankfully, he had his breakout. I saw him a couple times in person, and I was like, no, this guy is legit. This guy is having a great season. The continued breakouts of guys like Teodo, guys like Santos, guys like Leiter having those big seasons, guys like Alejandro Rosario having big old seasons. And then Kohl Drake was also a huge riser. I mean, on the verge of the top 10. He was 24 at midseason. He's still having a nice season at midseason, but I hadn't seen him quite yet, and I was like, not quite sure of how high to put this guy. But again, the state of this farm it's fine. It's about where you'd want to be as a contender. There's some guys at the top end. You look at the top 5, it's pretty healthy. I mean, Sebastian Walcott has an incredibly high ceiling. Guys like Rocker, Rosario, Leiter, and Teodo, those are all guys you feel pretty good about. Then you go all the way down to, the top 10, it fills out pretty nicely. Bratt being on there as a guy whose ceiling is probably number 4 starter is not the most encouraging, but I think his floor for me is maybe number 5 starter. Like, I feel really good about him being a big league starter for not just a couple of years, but for having a decently long big league career. And that's not something you could say about really any Rangers pitching prospect the last couple of years, that you feel that good about them. But then you start looking into the 20s and all the way down to 30, and you're looking at a lot more relief guys, which is not the greatest, especially when they are just projecting as relievers. That's not a whole lot of value. That's not a hugely great sign. You need those guys in your system, but when there's not, 25, 30 deep of guys, you're like, okay, you could squint and see them being in an everyday kind of role, whether that's in the starting rotation or whether that's as a position player, an everyday, first division position player. There's not all that many guys there with that kind of a ceiling. So again, that's kind of shows, but this is the state of things. That's kind of how it goes when you win a World Series championship. And also when you graduate two guys with the ceilings of perennial all-stars, your system's going to take some hits. It's just how things go. And also when you graduate guys like Josh Young, like Leody Taveras, who neither of whom qualify in my top 10 players 25 and under. But while we're talking about that, let's go ahead and get into it right after this. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. They've got all kinds of different odds up for Major League Baseball. At this point, they've got World Series odds. They've got AL West winner odds, where the Rangers are second best, tied with the Seattle Mariners for the second best odds. But let's look at the player awards odds, because right now the Rangers have some favorites in there. Not absolute favorites, but way up there in the individual awards list. Right now, Corey Seager is the 5th favorite for MVP of the American League, plus 1,200, behind guys like Aaron Judge, Bobby Witt Jr., Gunnar Henderson, and Yordan Alvarez. And then you look at the Cy Young favorites, and look right there. Number 4, a Texas Ranger, Jacob deGrom, the 4th favorite, behind only the likes of current reigning Cy Young winner Tarek Skubal, Garrett Crochet, and former Ranger great and World Series champion Cole Reagan. So could you go check out all those odds? Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Shout out to the Aviators for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, I'll be back talking about some news and notes, some arbitration avoidings, and an interview with a Rangers signee, Alan Trejo, a really good conversation I recorded last week that I'm excited for y'all to hear from him about his journey to Texas. Now let's get into the top 10 Texas Rangers players in their system from the big leagues to the smaller leagues. In the minor leagues, 25 and under. This is players who are 25 and under as of opening day 2025. So there are some guys who are going to be heading into their age 26 season that are on here, guys heading into their age 25 season. But this is kind of an exercise that I really, really like that Baseball Prospectus does when they unveil their prospect rankings. It's kind of an inclusive of it's, when you're talking about the farm system, you talk about the future of an organization, you can't just talk about prospects. You also have to talk about the guys who are, young, early on in their career that are, 25 and under, that are going to be part of a young core moving forward. So, once guys graduate from the minor leagues to the big leagues, they're still there and they're still a part of the future of this organization, and arguably more important, actually, it's not even very arguable. It's pretty much a fact that they are more important than these young prospects because their floors are a little bit more established because they're already big leaguers. So let's look at the top 10 Rangers players 25 and under right now. Number 1 in this system, I'm sure you can guess who it is. No, it's not Sebastian Walcott. It is, of course, Wyatt Langford, coming off of a 4-WAR season, a year removed from college. It's just, I can't say enough about how incredibly impressive and how incredible that is, how rare that is. The jump from the minor leagues to the big leagues is as big as it's ever been. The jump from college to the minor leagues is also just massive at this point. And for him to just blaze through the system from basically the second he got drafted, proving, hey, I'm too good for basically every minor league level I'm in about a span of, 2 weeks or so. He was never at one level for more than, I think, 20 games was the most. 200 minor league plate appearances before he made his big league debut. That's incredible. And yeah, there were some struggles early on in his big league career, the first couple of weeks, there are still some moments of brilliance. The ceiling on this guy is so incredibly high, and the floor was really, really raised this year. I mean, the elite speed, not just, oh, he's kind of fast. This is one of the fastest players in baseball. And oh, by the way, he knows the strike zone incredibly well. And oh, by the way, he's still figuring out how to play defense. And I think his floor defensively is, good left fielder. Not just average, but really good left field, because he's already got there by the end of the season. And heck, I think he could be not just a passable center fielder, but a really good one. I mean, this guy has not played that much defense in the outfield in his life. He came into college as a catcher / corner infielder. He's playing some third base, playing some first, playing some catcher. And they said, okay, well, you're too fast, you're too athletic, to be a catcher. Let's put you in the outfield. And, he only played there 2 years. He didn't really play much at all his freshman year. And he just got better by leaps and bounds. I mean, early on in the season, the Rangers were planning on, okay, feels like we can only DH this guy. But by the end of the year, I mean, he was making great plays in the outfield, not just in left field, but in center field as well, robbing home runs, getting outfield assists, getting much better reads on baseballs, because he just needed those reps. And the bat was so good that, you had to have him in there. In an offense that had a really down year, Wyatt Langford and Corey Seager were pretty much the bright spots of this team. And with the floor is incredibly athletic, good defensive, good strike zone approach, elite speed kind of outfielder who at worst is a plus defender in a corner. And the ceiling is still, perennial all-star, MVP candidate, best player in baseball type of guy. That's the kind of ceiling this guy is putting up, because you look at what he did in year one, and if a 4-WAR season with 16 home runs, nearly a 2020 season, if the season had gone on a little bit longer, if he maybe had figured some things out just a little bit quicker, then you're looking at a floor of a 330 on base, 750-ish type OPS with elite defense in a 2020 season. That's the kind of floor on this kid, and he's still so freaking young. I mean, he just turned 23 in November of last year. He's so incredibly young and so incredibly talented. I mean, the sky is the limit for this kid and for the number 2 player in this Ranger system, 25 and under, Sebastian Walcott. I talked a lot about it on Friday's show about how incredibly high the ceiling is for Walcott. Now, the floor is much, much lower. Again, we've barely seen him in AA at this point for, a week or two? And he's going to be the everyday shortstop as a 19-year-old of the AA Frisco Rough Riders. That is an incredibly aggressive assignment, but last year was an aggressive assignment too. And he figured that out. He still has to get a lot better at facing higher quality, pitchers, guys who can land their breaking balls for strikes, land their off-speed stuff for strikes, and then also expand the zone with it. He's really good at hitting fastballs. The physical tools are maybe even, I don't want to say more impressive than Langford, because Langford has probably double plus raw power in there and, 75, 80 grade speed. Walcott has pure 80 raw power. It's off the charts, and it's already showing up in games. Not as much in the home run total, but go look at his double totals, his triple totals, the amount of extra base hits that kid had at such a young age. And he's got plus speed as well, and an absolute bazooka cannon for an arm that probably profiles well in right field or third base if that's where he ends up sticking. But Walcott's ceiling is also that of a guy who could get MVP votes, maybe even win an MVP one day. He's probably going to strike out a little bit more. Doesn't quite have the same, plate discipline that Langford and guys like Evan Carter have as well. But he could very easily be a guy who hits 40 home runs, plays Gold Glove defense out there in right field, and has plus speed. I mean, the guy has such an incredible physical set of tools that you don't really see. Now, the softer skills, it's taken some time to refine those, but again, that kind of raw potential and the aptitude for being challenged, the ability to say, hey, I want to be a big leaguer at 19. I want to make my big league debut before I turn 20. That is not something that happens very often, especially now with how wide the gap is from the minor leagues to the big leagues. It takes a lot to get there, and this kid is not one that I would ever bet against. I mean, the season that he put up last year, he might have been ready for Double-A in July or so. I mean, from the first couple weeks looking completely overmatched to, really figuring things out pretty quickly of how to adjust to that level, how to, figure out how pitchers were attacking him and how to, make those adjustments and get better and put up not just, decent numbers, but really good numbers, and not just, really good numbers for, his age, but just really good numbers for anybody at that kind of level of competition. And for him jumping through this system so fast with, figuring out those soft skills, raising the floor of what kind of player he could be, that is an incredibly exciting player to watch, and maybe the most intriguing player in all of the minor leagues. Of just the wide range of outcomes of what he could be is so fascinating, and I am so glad that he is a part of the Rangers system. Coming up, we're going to talk about a couple more big leaguers and how high their ceilings and floors are after a little bit of a down year, or maybe a big bit of a down year in 2024. All that and more right after this. Shout out to the Air for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. I'll be back on Wednesday talking more about Roki Sasaki and maybe some minor leaguers that the Rangers have signed in their international class, or maybe even not signed, because the 15th is an important date, and we'll talk more about that on Wednesday's show. But number 3 player, 25 and under in this Rangers system, is a guy who was thought of as the little savior, the next big thing for the Texas Rangers, a World Series champion, and still just 22 years old. That's right, it is Evan Carter at number 3 in this top 10 players 25 and under in the Rangers system. Now, this is a guy who, after last year, if you would have told me that he would be at 3 in this spot, no matter who was ahead of him, I would have been really worried about the outcome of his 2024. And it was a worrying outcome. I mean, 2023 was incredible, absolutely sensational. I mean, those 75 plate appearances in the big leagues, putting up an OPS over 1,000 against tough competition, the toughest competition in the highest stakes environment. There was not a lot of pressure put on him to come up and be the savior, but a little bit there was. I mean, when Adolis Garcia went down with that injury in September, the Rangers had no idea that Carter would be able to come up and put up that kind of performance, that he's hitting third in a World Series game as a 21-year-old. I mean, it's insane the level of success he had in 2023. And so, of course, he was going to come back down to earth at least a little bit in 2024. But the coming back down to earth was not just coming back down to earth from the stratosphere. He kind of went underground just a little bit. I mean, only 50 some odd games last year, 45 games last year. I mean, he had a 1.6 WAR season in 23 games in 2023 in the regular season. And in 45 games, nearly double, he had less than half of that WAR at 0.6. This was a rough year for him. This was a 630 OPS. Still showed that floor of, being elite with the chase rate. I mean, among the best in baseball, above average walk rate, but still striking out at a decent bit, even though he wasn't swinging and missing all that much. The sprint speed was still in the top 3% of baseball. So that floor of him being, a guy who gets on base, who steals bags, who can play good defense in the outfield, that's still very much there. But we got no closer to figuring out if Evan Carter can hit big league quality left-handed pitching. We have no idea about how his back is going to hold up long term. I mean, 2 different seasons that were pretty heavily derailed by back injuries before you turn 22. It's not a great sign. It's a really worrying sign for someone who is so young to have those kind of problems. And the fact that he might also be just a platoon player. Again, if you're going to platoon against one kind of handed pitcher, righties, there's quite a few more of them than lefties, and the Rangers could have used some more guys who absolutely crush righties, which Evan Carter did and has in his baseball career. There's still quite a bit of mystery among them, but I still think the floor is so high. A lot of it's going to come down to those back issues. If the back issues could completely derail his career, I mean, that's the kind of level of worry that I have, that I think a lot of other guys who are prospect evaluators have. in baseball perspectives, and their top 10 players, 25 and under, they put Carter below Rocker. And Rocker has a whole lot of injury question marks. I think more question marks than Carter, because the ceiling there is a guy who's got a career 350 on base, who's playing Gold Glove caliber defense in center field. I think he's got that kind of potential. Who's hitting you 10 to 20 home runs. Maybe if things break really right and that back really isn't a problem, and he can add some weight, then he could get somewhere to the 25-ish homer plateau. I mean, he doesn't have a whole lot of raw power, but he really gets the most out of it, his game power. I mean, we saw those 5 home runs in 23 games or whatever it was down the stretch in 2023, and he was also putting up some decent extra base hits in the postseason as well. He really gets the most out of his raw power, turning it into plus, I think, game power eventually. I don't think he's going to have a 30 homer season, but I think 20-25 bombs if things break right, if he can get that pitch selection right, where he knows what pitches he can take advantage of. He knows the strike zone incredibly well. I mean, this is an elite level of pitch recognition and plate discipline that sets his floor really high. Even if he's not hitting lefties particularly well, he's still going to force him to be in the strike zone. And so that alone will keep him, I think, in at-bats and keep him from being a strict platoon player where the Rangers just don't play him at all against lefties. It's going to be a big year for Evan Carter, though. If he can stay healthy, then that really, really raises that floor. And that's kind of the biggest question for Carter, more so, in my opinion, than if he can hit lefties. He's had so few opportunities to even get chances against lefties, to get better, to see quality lefties, and to improve. But again, he's so freaking young. And he just blazed through the minor league system, not quite as fast as Wyatt Langford, but still incredibly fast for a guy who was not on almost anybody's draft boards. And getting that kind of production, even if Evan Carter never played another major league game the rest of his life, if the Rangers just got that 2023 stretch run out of Evan Carter, that is an incredibly massive win for a second-round pick in a draft that was so weird and wild. And I still think that the ceiling is as high as it's been with Carter. I don't view his ceiling any differently after this down year. It's just the floor kind of fell down a little bit with those health scares with the back. The Rangers are very confident that this isn't going to be an issue moving forward. Evan Carter seems to be confident in it. We still need to see it on the field to really know for sure if it's going to be something that takes him from a guy who has the kind of, Rangers Hall of Fame potential, maybe even Hall of Fame potential. Who knows? That's still getting way ahead of ourselves. But again, you have to remind yourself how young this guy is and, how high his ceiling was thought of right after that incredible 2023 postseason run. Now, number 4 in this system, Kumar Rocker. Again, I've talked a lot about him on last week's shows. The ceiling is incredibly high with him. There's some competition with Evan Carter, for who is going to be higher on this list. I think that Rocker's ceiling is higher because you have a number 1 in your rotation, an ace. That is a difficult thing to do. Rocker's also a lot older. I mean, Rocker has been in the major leagues for all of 3 games at this point, but he is 25 years old. This is his last year that he's going to be on this list. He turned 25 in November, and Evan Carter is still 22 years old. He just turned 22 in September. It's kind of mind-boggling to think how young Carter is. I mean, how young Wyatt Langford is, and Carter is still a year younger than him. I mean, those guys are just so young, and their ceiling is so high, and their future is hopefully so bright that it's going to keep this Rangers window of contention open, I think, a lot longer than some people who think that the Rangers 2023 was just a fluke and they're one and done. I think they are only on the rise, and with guys like Rocker and Carter and Langford and Walcott in this system, this is not a team that's going to go away anytime soon. Number 5 player, 25 and under, Alejandro Rosario. Number 6, Jack Leiter. A lot of these guys I've talked about ad nauseum last week about how great they are, how high their ceilings are, how where their floor is at for what's kind of the bottom outcome that you could expect for those guys. Leiter really, really raised that floor last year in a way that he hadn't since the Rangers drafted him. I loved what I saw from him. Rosario, I'm not exactly sure where to put that floor for him. I think, at worst, he's again, a really, really nasty reliever. He's still a ways away. He's only had one professional season. It was an incredible first professional season. But again, he's not pitched in Double-A as of yet, so that floor is still, who knows what it could be with him. Number 7 in the Rangers' top 10 players, 25 and under, is Emiliano Teodo. Talked a lot about him. He's the guy who I saw pitch the most last year. I saw him for 3 different starts, and I love what I saw from Teodo. Switching that fastball up from a 4-seamer that didn't really move all that much to a 2-seamer with some sink, some movement to it, and still having that elite velocity on it, pairing that with his exceptional breaking ball, and we'll see what that changeup looks like moving forward. I thought it was a fine pitch. It worked really well when you've got 2 elite pitches. Just having that third one that's really good against left-handed hitters to just kind of keep them off speed, keep them guessing, keep them not on the fastball and the slurvy, curvy, slidery kind of breaking ball that he has. That's so incredibly good. Adding just that other look, I think, will keep hitters honest enough that maybe he can stick as a starter. I don't know. He really needs to throw a lot more strikes, but last year was a massive step forward for him. Now, the last big leaguer on this top 10, number 8, Ezequiel Duran. I've been one of the high guys on Zeke Duran for a long, long time. I still think he could be a first division starter, whether that's at third base or shortstop, or maybe even in right field or second base. I think is a waste of his absolute, thermonuclear missile of a right arm. The guy's got the strongest arm in the Rangers system, big leagues all the way to the bottom of the minor leagues. Zeke Duran constantly was uncorking just massive throws, especially when he was out there in left field, and he was recording 90 plus 90, I think 5 mile-an-hour throws. I mean, the guy has got an absolute heat-seeking missile of an arm. Maybe, I think, even stronger than the likes of Leo Taveras and Adolis Garcia, who both have elite arms. So at Zeke at number 8, we'll see how much run he gets at this point. I thought the Rangers might end up trading him this offseason, maybe for a Devin Williams type or just some other kind of bullpen help, because that's really the last place on this roster that needs just a little bit of an upgrade. I think the offense has gotten back up to where it needs to be, to near elite levels, but I think there is a role there for Zeke Duran at the big league level this year, maybe just DHing against left-handed pitching, because I don't think Jock Peters is going to hit that much against left-handed starters, but I'm still really, really high on Zeke Duran. Maybe he will end up actualizing potential with Texas. He'll have to be traded elsewhere, but I think that guy still could be an everyday starter, and if, Lord forbid, the Rangers have another stretch where, whether it's Josh Young or it's Corey Seager or even Marcus Semien go down for an extended stretch, Zeke Duran is the guy who could step up there, do a role, and excel as an everyday starter in a big league capacity. Now, the last couple guys on this list, number 9, Malcolm Moore, Rangers' first-round pick. Again, he's still very, very far off, but when you have a guy in your system who could be an everyday catcher and hit 20, maybe 25 home runs a year, that is not the kind of guy who comes around very often, and he's still so far away. He only played 25 or so professional games, but I really, really like what the Rangers saw in him, plus the makeup grades of this guy being a guy who you would love to have be your everyday catcher. I'm really, really high on what he could be. And the number 10 player in the Rangers system, 25 and under, is Winston Santos. Talked a lot about his breakout last year. If the Rangers minor league system stopped at midseason, Winston Santos would have probably been the story of the year. A little bit tougher for him once he got to Double-A, but again, the strides he made forward, again, he might end up in the Rangers' pen long term, but I think he could be as high as a number 3 starter, and that kind of a ceiling is a really, really good thing for this Rangers club that has had to spend so much on starting pitching over the last 3-4 seasons, that having every single guy that could be a starter anywhere from the back end of the rotation to the middle of the rotation is a massive, massive boost to this Rangers team. I think the future is really, really bright for this Rangers squad. Coming off of a down year in 2024, they have so many young guys that I think make me just so incredibly excited to see what the next few years are going to look like for the Texas Rangers. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for listening and subscribing, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.